The city of New Geneva stretched across the green valleys of Kepler 442b like a painting made real. 3 million humans called this world home. They had built schools and hospitals. They had planted forests and filled lakes with fish from Earth. Children played in parks while their parents worked in factories that produced medicine for a dozen different species across the galaxy. Marcus Webb stood on his balcony and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. His daughter Lily sat behind him, struggling with her mathematics homework. His wife Anna was cooking dinner, and the smell of garlic and tomatoes filled their small apartment. It was an ordinary evening. It was perfect. Marcus had served in Earth's diplomatic corps for 20 years. He had helped negotiate trade agreements with the Corvani Federation. He had mediated disputes between the Thessan Republic and the Mori Collective. He believed in peace. He believed that humanity's role in the galaxy was to build bridges between species that had spent centuries building walls. The first warning came at exactly 7:42 in the evening. The emergency broadcast system activated across every screen and speaker in the city. A calm voice announced that unknown ships had entered the system. Citizens were advised to remain calm and await further instructions. Marcus pulled up the news feed on his tablet. The images showed a fleet of warships emerging from slip space above the planet. He recognized the design immediately. Velthari. His stomach turned cold. The Velthari Dominion had conquered 200 worlds over the past 1,000 years. They believed themselves superior to all other species. They had demanded tribute from Earth 3 times in the past century, and 3 times Earth had politely refused while the Galactic Concord issued statements of concern. The Velthari had never pushed further. Most species assumed they respected Earth's membership in the Concord. Marcus now understood that the Velthari had simply been waiting. The bombardment began without warning or demand for surrender. Bright lines of fire fell from the sky like rain made of light. The first impact struck the industrial district on the far side of the city. Marcus watched towers collapse into clouds of dust and flame. The sound reached him seconds later, a deep rumble that shook the windows of his apartment. Anna grabbed Lily and pulled her away from the window. The girl was crying. Marcus could not move. He stood frozen as more and more fire fell from the sky. The Velthari were not targeting military installations. There were no military installations on New Geneva. They were targeting everything. The shelters were useless. They had been designed to protect against natural disasters, not orbital bombardment. Millions of people ran through streets that turned to rivers of broken glass and burning debris. The hospitals filled with wounded in the first 10 minutes. The hospitals themselves were destroyed in the first hour. Marcus finally moved when the impacts grew closer. He grabbed his family and ran. They made it 3 blocks before a blast wave threw them all to the ground. When Marcus opened his eyes, his ears were ringing and his vision was blurred with dust and blood. He found Anna first. She was unconscious but breathing. Then he found Lily. His daughter was not breathing. He held her small body in his arms while the world burned around him. He screamed her name until his voice broke. Anna woke and saw what he was holding. The sound she made was not human. It was the sound of something breaking that could never be repaired. The bombardment lasted 6 hours. When it finally stopped, the city of New Geneva no longer existed. Where 3 million people had lived that morning, there was only ash and silence. The Velthari had not landed troops. They had not attempted to occupy the planet. They had simply erased a human colony from existence. The Velthari High Command broadcast the destruction live across every channel in the galaxy. They wanted everyone to see. They wanted everyone to understand what happened to species that refused to pay tribute to the Dominion. The broadcast ended with a message from Supreme Commander Vorn Kethis. "Let this serve as a lesson," he said. His face was covered in ceremonial scars that marked his military victories. His eyes showed no emotion at all. Humanity has enjoyed the protection of the Galactic Concord for 2 centuries. They have grown soft and weak. They have forgotten that the galaxy belongs to the strong. We have reminded them. We will continue to remind them until they learn their place. The message was received on Earth 14 hours later. By then, the survivors of New Geneva had already sent their own transmissions. Videos of the destruction, lists of the dead, the final messages of parents to children, of children to parents, of lovers separated by fate and fire. The government of United Earth called an emergency session. Every representative attended. They watched the footage in silence. They read the names of the dead. They listened to Supreme Commander Kethis laugh about the cleansing of New Geneva. Ambassador Chen Liwei was given the task of addressing the Galactic Concord. He was an old man who had spent his entire life believing in diplomacy. He had shaken hands with leaders from 100 different species. He had always believed that words could solve any problem if spoken with enough patience and wisdom. He stood before the assembled representatives of 300 civilizations and spoke clearly. The Velthari Dominion has committed an act of unprovoked genocide against a civilian population. 2.3 million human beings are dead. They included teachers and doctors. They included artists and engineers. They included 400,000 children. His voice cracked on the last word. He paused to collect himself. We demand justice. We demand that the Concord take action against this atrocity. The response came from the Concord's High Council. They expressed deep concern. They condemned the attack in the strongest possible terms. They announced economic sanctions against the Velthari Dominion. They promised to form a committee to investigate the incident. The Velthari ambassador sat in his designated seat throughout the proceedings. His name was Theron Vec, and he had served the Dominion for 60 years. When Ambassador Chen finished speaking, Theron Vec began to laugh. It was not a subtle sound. He laughed loud and long while the entire Concord watched. When he finally stopped, he wiped tears of amusement from his eyes and spoke directly to the human ambassador. Your species has always amused me, he said. You talk of justice and peace as if these words have meaning. You build your little colonies and plant your little gardens and pretend that the galaxy cares about your existence. The galaxy does not care. The strong take what they want. The weak die. This has always been true. This will always be true. Your Concord cannot protect you. Your words cannot protect you. Nothing can protect you. We will burn every world you have ever touched, and when we are finished, the only memory of humanity will be the ash we leave behind. Ambassador Chen said nothing. He looked at Theron Vec for a long moment. Then he turned and walked out of the chamber. Earth's government went silent for 7 days. No official statements, no diplomatic communications, no response to the dozens of messages sent by concerned allies. The Corvani offered military support. The Thessans offered sanctuary for human refugees. The Mori offered financial aid. Earth thanked them all and asked for nothing. The galaxy watched and waited. Most species assumed that humanity was paralyzed by grief. They had always been a gentle people. They had always chosen words over weapons. They had always believed that cooperation was stronger than conflict. The destruction of New Geneva had finally broken them. The Velthari Dominion began planning their next attack. They had tasted blood and found it sweet. Supreme Commander Kethis selected 3 more human colonies for destruction. He wanted to finish what he had started. He wanted to prove to the galaxy that humanity was nothing more than prey waiting to be consumed. On the 7th day of silence, something happened that no one in the galaxy expected. Deep beneath the surface of Luna, massive doors that had remained sealed for 200 years began to open. The facilities they revealed had been built in secret during humanity's first century among the stars. They had been maintained by a small group of engineers who passed their knowledge from generation to generation. They had been designed for a single purpose: survival. Marcus Webb had survived the bombardment of New Geneva. He had buried his daughter in a grave marked only by a small stone. He had held his wife while she wept until she had no tears left. He had thought about dying. He had thought about giving up. Then he had received a message from Earth. The message contained only 2 words and a set of coordinates. We remember. Marcus looked at the coordinates. They pointed to a recruitment center that had not existed 1 week ago. He did not know what he would find there. He did not know what Earth was planning. He only knew that his daughter was dead and that the beings who killed her were still laughing. He kissed his wife goodbye and traveled to the coordinates. What he found there changed everything he believed about his own species. And somewhere in the cold dark between stars, the Velthari Dominion continued to laugh. They would not laugh for much longer. Admiral Yuki Tanaka had never wanted to be a soldier. As a child growing up in Kyoto, she had dreamed of becoming a poet. She had written verses about cherry blossoms and autumn leaves, and the way moonlight fell on still water, Her mother had saved every poem in a small wooden box that still sat on the shelf of her childhood bedroom. But Yuki had also inherited her grandfather's memories. He had told her stories about Earth's history before first contact. He had told her about wars that consumed entire continents. He had told her about weapons that could destroy cities in a single flash of light. He had told her that humanity's greatest strength was not its capacity for peace, but its capacity for violence held in check. We are not gentle because we cannot be cruel, he had said. We are gentle because we choose to be gentle. And that choice is what makes us dangerous. Yuki had not understood those words when she was young. She understood them now. The recruitment center that Marcus Webb found was located 300 meters beneath the surface of Mars. It had been disguised as a mining operation for 2 centuries. The thousands of people who worked there believed they were extracting rare minerals from the Martian crust. Only a handful knew the truth. Marcus walked through corridors carved from red stone until he reached a massive chamber filled with rows of seats. Hundreds of other survivors sat in silence. Some had burns covering their bodies. Some had bandages wrapped around missing limbs. All of them had the same look in their eyes. It was the look of people who had lost everything and were searching for a reason to keep living. A woman in a black uniform walked onto the stage at the front of the chamber. She was tall and lean, with gray hair cut short and eyes that seemed to look through people rather than at them. She introduced herself as Admiral Yuki Tanaka, commander of the 1st Shadow Fleet. "You are here because you survived," she said. Her voice was soft but carried easily through the silent chamber. "You are here because someone you love did not survive. You are here because you want answers. I will give them to you." She pressed a button, and a holographic display appeared behind her. It showed the logo of the Galactic Concord surrounded by the flags of 300 species. 200 years ago, humanity made first contact with the galaxy. We were welcomed into the Concord as a minor species with limited technology and even more limited resources. We accepted this position gladly. We believed that the galaxy was a place of reason and law. We believed that the Concord would protect its members from aggression. We believed that we could grow slowly and safely within the shelter of galactic civilization. The display changed to show images of Velthari warships. We were wrong. Within the first decade of membership, we watched the Velthari Dominion conquer 12 worlds. We watched the Concord issue statements of concern. We watched millions of sentient beings die while the galaxy's leaders debated and negotiated and accomplished nothing. We realized then that the Concord was not a shield. It was a comfortable illusion that allowed weak species to pretend they were safe, while strong species took whatever they wanted. The display changed again. Now it showed schematics of ships that Marcus did not recognize. They were sleek and angular, built for speed and violence. Earth's government made a decision. In public, we would remain the gentle traders and diplomats that the galaxy expected us to be. We would build our civilian fleet for commerce and exploration. We would send our ambassadors to negotiate treaties that everyone knew would be broken. We would play the role of the harmless newcomers who posed no threat to anyone. Admiral Tanaka paused. Her expression did not change, but something shifted in her eyes. In private, we prepared for the day when playing that role would no longer be possible. We built facilities on every moon and asteroid we could reach. We developed technologies that we never shared with the Concord. We trained soldiers in secret academies that do not officially exist. We created a military force designed for a single purpose: to ensure that no species would ever again believe that humanity was prey. The display now showed fleet after fleet of warships emerging from hidden bases across the solar system and beyond. Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. There were thousands of them, tens of thousands. You were not told about this because secrecy was our greatest weapon. The galaxy believed we had a defensive fleet of perhaps 200 ships. They believed our technology was average at best. They believed that humanity would collapse under any serious military pressure. They believed these things because we wanted them to believe these things. Admiral Tanaka looked out at the assembled survivors. The Velthari killed 2.3 million of our people because they believed we could not stop them. They were wrong, and now they will learn exactly how wrong they were. The briefing lasted 3 more hours. Marcus learned about weapon systems, that could crack planets like eggs. He learned about shield technology that could withstand the combined firepower of entire fleets. He learned about propulsion systems that allowed ships to appear anywhere in the galaxy within hours rather than weeks. He learned that humanity had not been sleeping for 200 years. Humanity had been building a force capable of fighting a war against the entire galaxy if necessary, and winning. Meanwhile, Velthari intelligence officers were beginning to notice strange readings from the Sol system. Energy signatures that should not exist. Ship movements that made no sense. Communications that they could not decrypt. Supreme Commander Kethis dismissed their concerns. Humanity was a broken species mourning their dead. Whatever they were doing, it was surely nothing more than desperate preparation for inevitable defeat. He ordered a scouting force of 40 ships to enter human space. Their mission was simple: assess the enemy's defenses and report back. The force was commanded by Sub-Commander Reth Voller, a young officer eager to prove himself. He expected to find scattered civilian vessels and perhaps a handful of outdated military ships. He expected to return home with valuable intelligence and a promotion. The 40 ships entered human space at the edge of the solar system. They engaged their scanning equipment and began collecting data. For exactly 17 seconds, everything proceeded according to plan. Then the stars went dark. That was how Sub-Commander Voller described it in his final transmission. One moment, the familiar patterns of distant suns surrounded his fleet. The next moment, darkness. Complete and absolute darkness, as if someone had placed a black cloth over the entire universe. The darkness lasted for 3 seconds. When light returned, the Velthari ships were surrounded. Human vessels had appeared from nowhere. They made no sound. They sent no warnings. They simply materialized in perfect formation around the scouting force, like predators surrounding trapped prey. Sub-Commander Voller tried to count them and stopped at 200. There were more. Many more. He attempted to send a distress signal. The signal never left his ship. He attempted to engage his weapons. His weapons did not respond. He attempted to retreat to slip space. His engines had been disabled by a technology he did not understand. A message appeared on his communication screen. It contained only 7 words. "You killed our children. We remember everything." The Velthari scouting force was destroyed in less than 1 minute. No survivors, no wreckage. The 40 ships and their crews simply ceased to exist. The only evidence that they had ever entered human space was a brief sensor reading captured by a Corvani trading vessel passing through a nearby system. Supreme Commander Kethis received the news 3 days later. He refused to believe it. 40 warships could not simply vanish. The humans must have captured them somehow. They must be holding the crew's prisoner. He demanded that Earth provide an explanation. Earth provided no explanation. Earth provided no communication of any kind. The government that had spent 7 days in silence remained silent. The only response came from the human ambassador to the Galactic Concord. She delivered a brief statement to the assembled representatives. The Velthari Dominion sent warships into human space. Those warships no longer exist. We advise all Velthari vessels to remain outside human territory. This is not a negotiation. This is not a request. This is a statement of fact. She turned to leave. The Velthari ambassador shouted for her to stop. He demanded answers. He threatened consequences. She did not turn around. She did not acknowledge his existence. She simply walked out of the chamber and returned to Earth. Supreme Commander Kethis was not accustomed to being ignored. He mobilized the entire Velthari military, 3,000 warships, the largest fleet ever assembled in the history of the Dominion. They had conquered 200 worlds with this force. They had crushed species that had existed for millions of years. They would crush humanity as well. Earth responded with a single broadcast transmitted across every frequency in the galaxy. The voice belonged to Admiral Yuki Tanaka, though she did not identify herself. "You burned our city. You murdered our children. You laughed while they died. We gave you a chance to walk away. You chose to send more ships instead. So now we will teach you something that you should have learned long ago." There was a pause. When the voice continued, it was quiet and cold. "There are worse things in this galaxy than the Velthari Dominion, and you just woke one of them up." The broadcast ended. The galaxy held its breath. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, 10,000 human warships began moving toward Velthari space. Admiral Tanaka stood on the bridge of her flagship and watched the fleet form around her. Each ship carried weapons that had never been tested in actual combat. Each crew had trained for decades for a war they hoped would never come. Now it had come, and they were ready. She thought about the poems she had written as a child. She thought about cherry blossoms and moonlight and still water. She thought about her grandfather's words. "We are gentle because we choose to be gentle." She gave the order to advance. Humanity was done being gentle. The Velthari home system was called Dominion Prime. It had been the heart of their empire for 6,000 years. 20 billion Velthari lived on the homeworld alone. Another 50 billion lived on the moons and stations and colony worlds that surrounded it. The system was protected by 3,000 warships, orbital defense platforms, and weapons capable of destroying entire fleets. Supreme Commander Kethis stood in his command center on the largest space station ever built. It was called the Iron Throne, and it had served as the military headquarters of the Dominion for 1,000 years. From this station, he had planned the conquest of 200 worlds. From this station, he had watched the bombardment of New Geneva. He had smiled while human children burned. He was not smiling now. Reports were coming in from across the Empire. Human ships had been detected entering Velthari space at a dozen different points simultaneously. This should have been impossible. Slipspace travel required careful calculation and precise timing. No fleet could coordinate arrivals across such vast distances with such perfect precision. Yet the humans had done exactly that. Kethis ordered his commanders to engage the enemy wherever they found them. The responses he received made no sense. Commanders reported that their weapons were failing, their shields were collapsing, their communications were being jammed. One by one, the voices fell silent until only static remained. The first human fleet arrived at Dominion Prime exactly 6 hours after the attacks began. They emerged from slipspace in perfect formation, 10,000 ships arranged in a sphere that surrounded the entire system. They did not attack immediately. They simply hung in the darkness and waited. Kethis studied the sensor readings and felt something he had not experienced in 50 years of warfare: fear. The human ships were larger than any vessel he had ever seen. Their energy signatures suggested power sources that his scientists could not explain. Their formation showed no gaps, no weaknesses, no points of vulnerability. He opened a communication channel. "This is Supreme Commander Vorn Kethis of the Velthari Dominion. You are in violation of sovereign Velthari space. Withdraw immediately or face destruction." The response came from a human woman with gray hair and calm eyes. She identified herself as Admiral Yuki Tanaka. "Supreme Commander Kethis, you ordered the destruction of New Geneva. You murdered 2.3 million civilians, including 400,000 children. You broadcast their deaths for entertainment. You laughed while they burned." Her voice carried no emotion at all. "This communication is not a negotiation. It is a notification. You have approximately 7 minutes to evacuate your command staff to the planet's surface. After that, the Iron Throne will no longer exist." Kethis cut the connection and ordered his fleet to attack. 3,000 warships launched themselves at the human formation. Weapons fire filled the void between them. Missiles and energy beams and kinetic projectiles streaked toward the enemy vessels. None of them arrived. The human ships projected some kind of field that absorbed everything the Velthari threw at them. Missiles detonated harmlessly against invisible barriers. Energy beams scattered and dissipated. Kinetic rounds stopped in mid-flight and hung motionless before falling into the gravity well of the nearest planet. Then the humans returned fire. Admiral Tanaka had given explicit orders. Military targets only. No civilian casualties under any circumstances. The weapons officers on every human ship had trained for years to achieve the level of precision required. They did not waste a single shot. The Velthari home fleet ceased to exist in 11 minutes. 3,000 warships, crewed by over 2 million soldiers, were reduced to expanding clouds of debris. The human ships moved through the destruction without slowing down. They targeted military installations on the planet's surface with the same surgical precision. Barracks and arsenals and command centers vanished in flashes of light. Not a single civilian building was touched. The Iron Throne was the last military target in the system. Kethis watched the human fleet surround his station. He had not evacuated. He had not believed they would actually destroy the symbol of Velthari power. He believed even now that this was some kind of elaborate bluff. A final message appeared on his screen. Your 7 minutes ended 3 minutes ago. We waited to see if you would choose wisdom. You did not. Goodbye, Supreme Commander. The Iron Throne was not destroyed by weapons fire. It was simply pulled apart by gravitational forces that should not have been possible. The station stretched and twisted like clay in the hands of an angry god. Kethis had exactly 2 seconds to understand what was happening before the hull collapsed around him. The galaxy watched through the sensor networks of 100 different species. The Corvani had positioned observation drones throughout Velthari space. The Thessans had monitoring stations along the border. Everyone saw what happened at Dominion Prime. Everyone saw the human fleet destroy the greatest military power in the galaxy in less than 30 minutes. And then something unexpected happened. The human ships did not continue their attack. They did not bombard the civilian population. They did not demand surrender or tribute. They simply began moving through the system, systematically targeting every piece of military infrastructure they could find. Shipyards were reduced to rubble. Communication arrays were shut down. Weapons platforms were disassembled piece by piece. But the civilians were left entirely alone. A Thessan diplomat named Corvetus was aboard one of the observation drones. He recorded his thoughts as he watched the human operation unfold. I have studied warfare for 200 years. I have witnessed the fall of empires and the rise of tyrants. I have never seen anything like this. The humans are not fighting a war. They are conducting an execution. Every movement is planned. Every shot is calculated. They are taking apart the Velthari military machine with the precision of a surgeon removing a tumor. He paused for a long moment before continuing. But that is not what frightens me. What frightens me is the restraint. The Velthari killed millions of human civilians without mercy. The humans could do the same thing right now. They could bombard every city on the homeworld. They could erase the Velthari species from existence. Instead, they are going out of their way to protect civilian lives. Do you understand what this means? It means they are not acting out of rage. They are not seeking revenge. They are making a calculated decision to destroy their enemy's ability to wage war while preserving their enemy's ability to survive. Corvetus turned his sensor array toward the human flagship. That kind of control requires a discipline that I did not believe any species possessed, and it raises a terrifying question. If the humans can be this controlled in the middle of a war, how much more powerful must they be than what they are showing us? What are they still holding back? The operations at Dominion Prime took 3 days to complete. When the human fleet finally withdrew, the Velthari homeworld remained intact. Its cities still stood. Its people still lived. But they had been reduced to a pre-spaceflight civilization in 72 hours. Every ship capable of leaving orbit had been destroyed. Every facility capable of building new ships had been dismantled. Every weapon capable of threatening other worlds had been eliminated. The same process was repeated across the entire Velthari Empire. 200 conquered worlds were liberated. The Velthari military installations on each world were destroyed with the same surgical precision. The civilian populations were left unharmed. Former slave species found themselves suddenly free, standing in the ruins of their oppressors' fortresses. The Galactic Concord called an emergency session to address the crisis. Representatives from 300 species filled the Great Hall. They demanded that humanity explain their actions. They demanded that the human fleet stand down. They threatened consequences. The human ambassador attended the session. Her name was Yuki Tanaka's sister, Mei Tanaka. She had the same gray hair and the same calm eyes. She stood before the assembled representatives and said nothing for a very long time. Finally, the Velthari ambassador broke the silence. His name was Theron Vec, the same diplomat who had laughed at humanity's grief weeks earlier. His voice shook as he spoke. This is barbarism. This is genocide. You have destroyed our civilization. You have murdered millions of our soldiers. You have reduced our species to savages. The Concord must respond to this atrocity. Mei Tanaka looked at him without expression. Then she reached into her pocket and produced a small device. She pressed a button, and a holographic recording began to play. It showed the bombardment of New Geneva. It showed buildings collapsing and people burning. It showed children running through streets filled with fire. And over all of it, it played the sound of Theron Vec laughing. The recording ended. May Tanaka put the device back in her pocket. "You asked for this," she said quietly. "You could have left us alone. You could have let our children grow up in peace. Instead, you chose to make us your enemy. We did not start this war, but we have ended it. Every Velthari civilian who was alive before the war is still alive now. Every city that stood before the war still stands now. We have taken nothing from your people except their weapons and their ability to hurt others." She looked around the chamber at the hundreds of species watching in silence. "Remember this day. Remember what happens when you mistake mercy for weakness. Remember that humanity asked for nothing except to be left in peace. And remember that the next species that murders our children will not receive the restraint we showed the Velthari." She turned and walked toward the exit. The assembled representatives said nothing. They simply watched her go, and in their silence was something that looked very much like fear. The war was over, but the galaxy would never be the same again. The galaxy fell silent in the weeks following the Velthari collapse. Communication channels that had buzzed with constant traffic went quiet. Trade routes that had carried ships by the thousands now carried only a few nervous merchants. Diplomatic channels that had been filled with threats and demands now contained nothing but carefully worded expressions of friendship and respect. Every species in the galactic concord was doing the same thing. They were reviewing their history with humanity. The Corvani Federation had been one of humanity's closest allies. They had traded goods and shared technology. They had welcomed human diplomats into their councils. But they had also turned away human refugees during a plague outbreak 40 years earlier. They had charged excessive tariffs on human medicine. They had quietly supported Velthari expansion because it weakened their own rivals. Did Earth remember? The Thessan Republic had voted against admitting humanity to the Concord when they first arrived. They had called humans primitive and unsuitable for galactic civilization. They had only changed their position when humans proved useful as mediators in their trade disputes with the Mori Collective. Did Earth remember? The Mori Collective had employed humans as laborers in their mining operations for decades. They had paid them less than they paid any other species. They had housed them in conditions that would have been illegal for Mori citizens. They had argued that humans were naturally suited for physical work. Did Earth remember? Ambassador Kel Varath of the Thessan Republic was the first to address this question directly. He traveled to Earth 2 weeks after the war ended and requested a meeting with the human government. He was received politely but kept waiting for 6 hours before being shown into a small conference room. The human who met him was not a high-ranking official. She was a mid-level diplomat named Sarah Chen, a cousin of the ambassador who had demanded justice from the conquered. She offered Kel Varath tea and asked how she could help him. "I have come to discuss the future relationship between our peoples," he said carefully. Sarah Chen nodded. "Of course. What aspects of that relationship concern you?" Kel Varath struggled to find the right words. "There is concern among our leadership that certain historical disagreements might affect how Earth views the Thessan Republic going forward." Sarah Chen's expression did not change. "Could you be more specific? We voted against your admission to the Concord. We used language that was disrespectful. We have not always been the ally that humanity deserved." He paused. "We would like to know if Earth holds any ill will toward our people." Sarah Chen was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled. "Ambassador Vorath, humanity has been a member of the Galactic Concord for 200 years. In that time, we have been insulted by nearly every species we have encountered. We have been exploited, discriminated against, and dismissed. We have been called primitives and savages and children playing at civilization. We recorded everything. We remember everything." Kel Vorath felt his heart begin to beat faster. "But we also recorded every act of kindness, every fair trade agreement, every moment of genuine respect. We remember those things too." Sarah Chen leaned forward slightly. "The question you should be asking is not whether Earth holds grudges. The question is whether your species has more to fear from its past or more to hope for from its future." She stood up and offered her hand in the human gesture of friendship. "The Thessan Republic was not always kind to us. But you were also not among those who murdered our children. That distinction matters. Go home, Ambassador. Tell your leaders that Earth judges species by what they do, not what they say. Tell them that we are watching, and tell them that the galaxy has a chance to be better than it was. We hope you will take that chance. Kelvarath returned to Thesson space with a message that would be repeated across the galaxy in the following months. Earth was not seeking vengeance against everyone who had wronged them, but Earth was watching. And Earth remembered. The Velthari homeworld presented a different kind of challenge. 70 billion people had been reduced to a pre-industrial civilization overnight. They had no ships to escape their system. They had no weapons to threaten anyone. They had only the infrastructure that had existed before their species developed spaceflight, preserved by human precision during the systematic destruction of their military capability. Some in the galaxy argued that this was crueler than simple extermination. The Velthari had been masters of 200 worlds. Now they were prisoners on their own planet, watching the stars they could no longer reach. Their children would grow up knowing that their ancestors had ruled an empire. Their grandchildren would learn to farm with tools their great-grandparents would have found primitive. Earth established a monitoring station at the edge of the Velthari system. Its purpose was simple: to ensure that no one helped the Velthari rebuild their military capability and to ensure that no one took advantage of their vulnerability. The station was crewed by volunteers, many of whom had lost family in the bombardment of New Geneva. Marcus Webb was among them. He had trained for 6 months before being assigned to the station. He had learned to operate sensor equipment and maintain defensive systems. He had sat through endless briefings about the importance of remaining professional and objective. He had been told that his job was to observe and report, nothing more. But some nights he stood at the observation window and looked at the distant light of the Velthari sun. He thought about his daughter Lily. He thought about the last time he had seen her smile. He thought about the sound she made when he found her body in the rubble of their street. He could have requested a transfer. He could have asked to serve somewhere that did not require him to watch over the people who had murdered his child. Instead, he stayed. He performed his duties without complaint. He treated the occasional Velthari communications with professional detachment. When asked why he chose to serve on the station, he gave the same answer every time. Because someone has to make sure this never happens again, and because my daughter would have wanted me to be better than my anger. The 200 worlds that had been conquered by the Velthari Dominion faced a different challenge. They had been subjugated for generations. Their cultures had been suppressed. Their populations had been forced to serve their conquerors. Now suddenly they were free. Many of these species had never known independence. They had no governments, no institutions, no experience managing their own affairs. Some descended into chaos as different factions fought for control. Some turned on the Velthari civilians, who had lived among them as administrators and settlers. Earth did not intervene directly. The human fleet withdrew to human space immediately after the war ended. But human diplomats began appearing on liberated worlds, offering assistance to anyone who requested it. They helped establish provisional governments. They mediated disputes between rival factions. They provided food and medicine and technology to populations that had been stripped of resources by their former masters. They asked for nothing in return. The Mori Collective watched this process with growing unease. They had profited enormously from Velthari expansion. They had traded with the Dominion for centuries. They had purchased resources extracted by Velthari slaves from conquered worlds. Now those worlds were free, and they were being helped by humans who had every reason to hate the Mori for their past treatment of human workers. Collective Elder Mor Kess requested a meeting with the human government. Unlike the Thesson ambassador, he was not kept waiting. He was received immediately and shown into a luxurious conference room where Ambassador Chen Liwei himself was waiting. Elder Kess, Chen said, bowing slightly, "Thank you for traveling so far to meet with us." Ambassador Chen, Mor Kess returned the bow, "I will speak directly. My people are afraid. We have treated humanity poorly for many years. We have exploited your workers and dismissed your contributions to galactic society. We fear that you have not forgotten." Chen nodded slowly. "We have not forgotten." Mor Kess felt his body grow cold. "Then you intend to punish us as you punish the Velthari?" "No." Chen's voice was soft but firm. "The Velthari murdered our children. You paid our workers less than they deserved. These are not the same thing." He paused. "But I will be honest with you, Elder. The galaxy is watching Earth very carefully right now. They want to know what kind of power we will be. They want to know if we will use our strength to take revenge on everyone who wronged us. And will you?" Chen looked out the window at the blue sky of Earth. 200 years ago, we were a species that had nearly destroyed itself through war and hatred. We reached the stars because we chose to be better. We chose cooperation over competition. We chose peace over violence. We built our hidden fleet hoping we would never need it. He turned back to face Morquez. We used that fleet to destroy a threat that would have consumed us. Now we must choose what kind of species we will be going forward. He walked over to Morquez and placed a hand on his shoulder. We choose to be better. We choose to forgive past wrongs while remembering them. We choose to help the galaxy heal rather than making it burn. Not because we are weak, not because we have forgotten, but because we believe that the future can be better than the past, if we are willing to build it together. Morquez returned to the collective with a message that would reshape galactic politics for generations. Earth was not seeking empire. Earth was not seeking revenge. Earth was seeking something that no one had expected. Earth was seeking peace, but it was a peace built on a foundation of absolute strength. And every species in the galaxy understood that if they ever again threatened humanity's children, they would face the same fate as the Velthari. The stars had fallen silent not because they were afraid to speak, but because they were finally learning to listen. 10 years passed. The galaxy that emerged from the Velthari War was not the galaxy that had existed before. The endless cycle of conquest and exploitation that had defined interstellar civilization for millennia had simply stopped. No empire expanded its borders. No species threatened its neighbors. Trade flourished without the shadow of military coercion. Disputes were resolved through negotiation rather than warfare. The Galactic Concord, which had been little more than a discussion forum before the war, became something resembling an actual government. Species that had ignored its resolutions for centuries now followed them carefully. Not because the Concord had become powerful, but because everyone understood what would happen if the old patterns of violence returned. Earth had not asked for tribute or territory. Earth had not demanded recognition as the dominant power in the galaxy. Earth had simply returned to its previous role as traders and diplomats and mediators. Human ships carried goods between worlds. Human ambassadors helped resolve conflicts before they became wars. Human engineers shared technology that improved lives across 1,000 civilizations. But everyone remembered what humanity was capable of. And everyone understood that the gentle face they showed the galaxy was a choice, not a limitation. Admiral Yuki Tanaka retired from military service 3 years after the war ended. She returned to Kyoto and opened a small tea house near the temple where her grandfather was buried. She spent her mornings writing poetry and her afternoons serving tea to customers who had no idea that the quiet old woman with the gentle smile had once commanded a fleet capable of destroying civilizations. Sometimes visitors from other worlds came to her tea house. They had heard rumors about a human admiral who had defeated the greatest military power in galactic history. They wanted to meet her. They wanted to understand how she had done it. She always welcomed them. She served them tea and listened to their questions. And she always gave them the same answer. "War is not complicated," she would say. "You identify your enemy's strength. You take it away. You do this as quickly and completely as possible so that the killing can end." She would pause to pour more tea. "The hard part is not winning. The hard part is knowing when to stop. The hard part is remembering that your enemy's children are still children, even when your enemy has murdered yours." Ambassador Chen Liwei passed away peacefully in his sleep 5 years after the war. His funeral was attended by representatives from every species in the Galactic Concord. Even the Velthari sent a delegation, traveling on a human ship because they no longer had any of their own. His final words to his family had been simple. "We proved that we could destroy. Now prove that we can build." Marcus Webb served on the monitoring station orbiting the Velthari system for 7 years. He watched the people who had killed his daughter learn to farm their own food and build their own homes. He watched their children grow up without ever knowing the stars their ancestors had conquered. He felt many things during those years: anger, grief, satisfaction. And finally, something that surprised him: pity. He requested a transfer to a diplomatic posting on one of the liberated worlds. He spent his remaining years helping former slave species build new societies. He taught their children to read and write. He helped their farmers improve their crops. He showed them that humans were not conquerors, even when they had the power to conquer anything. When he died at the age of 87, he was buried on a world that had been freed by the same fleet that avenged his daughter. His grave was marked with a simple stone that read, Marcus Webb, Father, Teacher, Builder. The Velthari homeworld slowly adapted to its new reality. The generation that had known spaceflight gradually died off, replaced by children who had never seen the stars except as distant lights in the night sky. Their culture changed. Their priorities changed. They became a people who measured success by the quality of their harvests rather than the number of worlds they controlled. 50 years after the war, a young Velthari woman named Sora Ven sat with her grandmother in their family's small home. The old woman's name was Kira Ven, and she had been a young officer in the Dominion fleet when the humans came. She had survived only because her ship had been assigned to patrol duty at the edge of the system and had surrendered without fighting. Sora looked up at the stars through the window and asked the question that every young Velthari eventually asked. Grandmother, why can't we go up there? Why do we have to stay on this world while other species travel wherever they want? Kira was silent for a long time. She had never told her granddaughter the full truth about the war. She had never described the bombardment of New Geneva, or the laughter of Supreme Commander Kethis, or the terrible swift justice that humanity had delivered. But Sora was old enough now. She deserved to know. Because we did something unforgivable, Kira said finally. We believed we were superior to everyone else. We believed that gave us the right to take whatever we wanted. We found a species that seemed weak and helpless, and we murdered their children for entertainment. Sora's eyes went wide. The humans? Yes, the humans. Kira looked at her granddaughter with eyes that had seen too much. They were not weak. They were not helpless. They had been preparing for a war that they hoped would never come for 200 years. When we attacked them, we woke something terrible. Something that could have destroyed us completely. But they didn't destroy us. No, they took away our weapons. They took away our ships. They took away our ability to hurt anyone ever again. But they left us alive. They left our cities standing. They left us the chance to build something better than what we were. Kira reached out and took her granddaughter's hand. Do you understand what that means? Sora shook her head. It means that even after we murdered their children, they chose to show us mercy. They could have given us the same death we gave New Geneva. Instead, they gave us a chance to learn from our mistakes. Kira's voice grew softer. We are still here because humans are better than we were. We are still here because they believe that even species who do terrible things can change. She looked up at the stars that her people would never reach again. The galaxy is quiet now. It has been quiet for 50 years, not because everyone is afraid of the humans, although they are. It is quiet because everyone has seen what happens when species treat each other as enemies rather than neighbors. It is quiet because everyone has learned the lesson that we learned at such terrible cost. Sora followed her grandmother's gaze to the stars. What lesson, grandmother? Kira smiled sadly. That peace is better than war. That building is better than destroying. That the species who show mercy to their enemies are stronger than the species who show none. She squeezed her granddaughter's hand. The humans taught the galaxy this lesson, and they paid for it with 2.3 million of their own people. They sat together in silence as the stars wheeled slowly overhead. Somewhere out there, human ships carried goods between worlds that had once been at war. Somewhere out there, human diplomats helped species that had once been enemies learn to trust each other. Somewhere out there, the descendants of the people who had built the most terrible weapons in galactic history were using their strength to build a future where such weapons would never be needed again. The stars had fallen silent 50 years ago. They remain silent still. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of peace. The silence of a galaxy that had finally learned to listen. And somewhere on Earth, in a small tea house in Kyoto, an old woman poured tea for visitors from distant worlds and smiled when they asked about the war. She had written a poem about it once, years ago. She had never shared it with anyone. But she thought about it sometimes when the evening light fell through her windows and made everything golden. The cherry blossoms fall in spring. The stars fall silent in the dark. Both are gentle. Both are brief. Both remind us that power means nothing without the wisdom to know when not to use it. She poured another cup of tea and watched the sun set over the mountains. Humanity had proven that they could destroy anything. Now they spent their days proving that they would rather build. And the galaxy, at long last, was at peace.